referencing other data besides the payload. Up to now, we've only referenced the message payload in the DataWeave expression, but you can also reference message variables and properties, you can call global mel functions, and call other Mule flows. In addition to the payload, you can also reference flow vars, inbound properties, outbound properties, system or Spring properties inside of your DataWeave transformers. Now, please note that this is not Mule expression language, so do not preface these values by message or using the hash and square brackets. A really common and cool thing that you can do with DataWeave is call out to global mel functions. You can define a global mel function in the configuration element you used to specify the default global exception handler in the previous module. An example of this global function you can see in the middle here, where we specify an expression language global function, and we can define a function like new user that will do some type of work, or upper name user, which would go call user.name.toUppercase, oftentimes being used to access different Java methods, such as some static method or helper utility that you want to call inside of your DataWeave expression. You can call the mel functions from DataWeave by effectively just calling the name of the method, since it's inside of global functions. From a DataWeave transform, you can call a different flow in your Mule application as well. Whatever the flow returns is effectively what the expression will return. So in this case, you can see A, and then the lookup keyword. Inside of lookup, we can specify the flow that we want to use as the left argument, and then the right argument being the actual item we want to pass through it. So the first argument, again, is the name of the flow to be called, and the second argument is the payload that we will send to the flow. Let's try some custom mel functions and calling other flows. In walkthrough 10.8, we'll define a global mel function in global XML. We'll call that global mel function in a DataWeave expression, and we'll also try calling a flow in a DataWeave expression as well. Let's get started. Inside of our project, let's return to the global XML, and we will go to the configuration XML inside of here. Within the configuration XML, we'll locate our configuration tags and perhaps put some breaks around it so it's a bit easier for us to work with here and identify. Inside of configuration, underneath our HTTP config, let's put an open caret, and we can use control space to autocomplete to the expression language tags. We'll then open up the expression language tags and put a cursor inside with a tab. Let's now open up and type in G and then do autocomplete, in which case we are going to choose the global functions tab inside and open that up as well for us to input some global function data inside as well. Within global functions, let's define a global function that we will call getNumSeats and put a type inside of here. We'll then open this up with some curly braces, and inside of this numSeats or getNumSeats function, we will go ahead and put in a if condition, and let's say if type.contains, and inside of contains we'll put in 737. We'll then open up this if statement, and inside of here we'll say return 150, and if not, we'll put an else condition in here to state that anything else should effectively return 300. So if it's a 737 type of plane, it will return 150 for the numSeats, otherwise 300. So now we've got this global method in place that should be reachable from DataWeave. Let's go ahead and save this file. In fact, we'll save all of our files so far. And then let's just try running the application. All right. Now, it's likely you're going to see that it failed, and if you scroll up, I believe you'll see a parse exception around invalid contents found with expression language. What we need to do here is delete that HTTP config tag inside of the configuration tag set. So let's go ahead and get rid of this HTTP config tag that got added here, if it was present on yours as well. And then let's save it up and attempt to let it restart once again. Now, assuming it does restart successfully, let's go ahead and stop it. I'm not so concerned about it running, just want to make sure it can start successfully. We'll go back to our implementation, and specifically we'll double click on transform message again to get back to our transformer we've been working on. All right, now from the transform message standpoint, I want to add an extra field called total seats. So let's put a comma in and say total seats inside of here. And for total seats, we will call get num seats. And as an argument for get num seats, we're going to pass in the plain type. Now, if the seats weren't there right out of the gate, maybe it's missing just in the preview area here, there may be a little nuance with the preview. So what I found helps is if you just get rid of the as flight so it can refresh itself, then put in as flights again, you should effectively see the total seats show up here. So you can see here, based on 737 or being a 777 or the else in condition, you can see how it fills in that total seat. So a great way for us to write little snippets of Java code if needed, call out to a static utility method, and so on, and do all of this from DataWeave via a global mel function. Let's now return to the implementation XML, and let's go ahead and drag in an expression component into the canvas. We'll bring this expression component below the post multiple flights flow. And let's right click on this expression component and rename it so that it is called get total seats flow. Now in this, we're going to do something very similar. We're going to go to our global XML and let's go ahead and copy the entire if statement that we already have inside of here. And back inside of implementation XML, we'll open up our expression and we'll paste in that expression inside of here. Now, after some quick formatting updates so it's a little bit easier to read, put this in place here. Okay. All right. In fact, one quick thing we should do before we move on, and this probably was a mistake in the global mel function as well, but luckily it didn't trip us up. Be sure to put a semicolon at the end of that return statement there, just so it gets ended correctly. And since this is a mel expression that we're using from a flow, we're no longer going to return a value to set. We're instead going to set the payload to that value. So replace each return with payload equals so that it returns a payload of that value that it can then store in the output structure. All right, so we'll save that up. And we'll go back to transform message. Inside of transform message now, we're basically going to try to do the same thing, but passing through a flow, of course. To do this, let's go ahead and comment out total seats, and we'll recreate total seats right underneath it, but this time we're going to use the lookup inside of here. So we will do a lookup, and lookup is going to take as its first argument the name of the flow, which we know is get total seats flow. And for the argument, we need to provide it the structure that we are going to pass in. So for the structure, we're going to give it a new object that we have called type. And inside of here, we are going to give it plain type as the argument. Now, if you still have at the very bottom of here, I believe we had as flights, the coercion, okay? It's quite likely if you do the as flights coercion, the preview will either break or it might look a little funky. That's because total seats is actually not part of that flights object. So be sure to make sure as flights, the coercion is removed at this point if it's not already. And we're just going to do this as a raw structure, okay, or a raw hash map, linked hash map, if you will. All right, so that overall is looking pretty good. Now you'll of course notice as well that it does say unknown, and this is of course because it is unable to resolve what this is. It has to be running for it to know what the flow would return. To do this, we'll run the application, and to ensure that Postman can get a response it will be able to parse back, let's change our output to application JSON. That way we can see it. We'll save up the application altogether, and let's be sure to start it fresh. So we'll stop it and start it, making sure that everything reloads because we've made a lot of changes. Now, as it's reloading, let's also go into source test resources and open up the flights-example.xml. In which case, I would like to grab all of the contents of the flights-example XML and copy that to your clipboard because we are going to post that into this flow. So let's go into Postman. And inside of Postman here, we want to make sure that we are effectively at localhost 8081 / multiple flights, and that we are posting a body into multiple flights. Now in the body tab, you're going to be sure to paste in that XML that you just copied from source test resources. And in the headers tab, we want to be 100% sure we have it set to content type application XML rather than application JSON. Now with this in place, you should be able to post your request, in which case you'll get your transformed JSON response back, which is including the total seats that is evaluating from dynamically calling that flow.